Hello and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers with me, your host, Emma Dhesi, and welcome. I'm in a really good mood today. I'm recording this at the end of May, and the sun has finally come out in Scotland, and it really does feel like summer is, if not fully arrived, it's on its way. And what a difference that makes to one's mood, doesn't it? For those of you who live in a permanently sunny place, you've maybe forgotten just how important the sunshine is and what an impact it can have on your mood and how you feel about yourself, but also about your writing and the sort of prospects for the future. But for those of you who do live in colder climates like I do, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say, oh, it makes a difference when the sun comes out, doesn't it? It just makes life feel bright and cheerful and optimistic again. So I'm loving it. Can't wait for full-on summer to arrive. But today we're going to be looking at how can you pace up the editing process? How can you speed that process up? And there's sort of two strands to this, I would say. And for most of you who are listening to me who are at the beginning side of the spectrum with your writing career. So you're maybe just your first, second, third, maybe even your fourth book in, very possibly, but you're at those earlier stages. And I think the bad news really for people who are at that stage of writing is there is no way to speed it up. It is something that takes time, and there's no kind of two ways about that, really. There's obviously different layers to the editing process, so let's sort of try and break those down a bit and think about when you want to do each level. So let's say, for example, you've written your first draft, and if you're anything like me, it's a very messy first draft. I'm a pantser, so I pretty much tell myself the story as I go along. There are some, I go down some wrong paths quite often and then have to pull myself back onto the main road until I get to the end. So my drafts tend to be very messy, especially when I think back to that first novel. It just took, what felt like forever to do that first draft. And there were lots and lots of big, bad wrong turns from which I had to kind of backpedal on to a sort of good junction and then continue going. Now, as I've written more, then I make less of those big wrong turns. There's obviously going to be a few wrong turns along the way, but practice has proven its worth here, and because I'm more practiced now, I make less of those wrong turns. But if you are writing your first, second, maybe even your third manuscript, you're probably still making quite a few biggish wrong turns that you will come back to and look at when you do your second round. So for pantsers, early on in your writing career, you are going to be making some big structural mistakes as you go along, and then you get to correct them because you're telling yourself the story and you're still learning how to structure a longer piece of fiction. So of course there's going to be more kind of mistakes along the way. For those of you who plan, this can go one of two ways, really. So if you're good at sticking to the plan, and you've kind of curtailed yourself from going off plan too much, you'll probably have a much cleaner draft. For those of you who do plan but kind of still go off plan, you're probably more similar to a pantser by this stage in that there's a few wrong turns and a few course corrections that need to be made. Either way, that is absolutely fine. Doesn't matter whether you're a pantser or a plotter, whatever you are, by the end of that first draft, there are things that need to be changed. And it might be, well, for sure, it's going to be the first round of revisions that you're doing. These are the big structural ones. These are the ones where you realise that there are some plot points out of sync, that actually you need to shift some plot points around because timeline-wise, it doesn't quite make sense for B to happen before A. You need to switch them around so that A happens before B. Now, these can be big, and depending on the state of your first draft, sometimes it requires a complete overhaul. A friend of mine wrote, I think she wrote the whole thing, and she might even have started on the second round of revisions and then realised, you know what? I need just to rip this whole thing up and I need to start again. So it was the same story, she still had the same characters, it was the same premise, but she realised the easiest thing for her to do, or the simplest thing, or what would make her feel better, was just to start again from scratch with the new knowledge that she has about the characters, about the story, and rather than fiddling about trying to make little tiny or make changes everywhere, it was just easier and sort of gave her more mental clarity just to start again from scratch. So that might happen to you. And if it does, that is a pain. Absolutely. It's not something we aspire to do. It's not something that we want to happen. But let me assure you that is not a waste. That is not a waste of time. That is not a waste of your energy. It's not a waste in any way, shape or form. Because what that means is that you've written a full first draft. You've realised it's not what you want to be. It's not what you want it to be. But you've written a full first draft. So you have had this extra practice of writing a full-length novel. That in and of itself is not a waste of time. In the drafting of that first draft and the drafting of that manuscript that you perhaps are not going to keep, you've been learning so much about the craft of storytelling as you've gone along, and you probably don't realise it. It's probably kind of sunk in little by little, sort of through osmosis, really. But you will have absorbed that learning. You'll be sort of embodying that learning now without even realising it. And so if you do need to then start from the beginning and write this book again from scratch, it's already going to be better. Already going to be better because you've been through that process of writing this story. So you know the story better. You've been writing about those characters, so you already know the characters better. But you've also had that fabulous practice in structuring a big long form piece of fiction, and that is invaluable, and you can put that down to one of your apprenticeship novels, because you will undoubtedly write 2, 3, maybe even 4 apprenticeship novels before you are have produced one that you feel confident enough to either go ahead and publish or to start querying. So it's all good. It's all part of the learning. Never, ever, ever feel like that is a waste of time. Okay, so you've got your first draft, and you know that it needs changes. So this is where, yes, as I was saying, this is where you make those big structural changes. And it might mean completely moving the middle section around. What happens where, making sure the timeline fits in. It might be that you've discovered, and this does often happen, I think, with earlier novels when we really want to just throw everything at it. There are too many subplots, too many characters. And so it might be that actually this is a point at which you get to realise, okay, I don't need 3 subplots. Do you know what? I actually only need 1, and maybe I can simplify the story and make it run smoother. Or maybe this is where you realise that you've got too many characters, and in fact, maybe 2 characters are playing the same role within the storyline, or that there's even a character missing. That could also happen as well, that you realise, I need to have this particular trope in there, or I'm missing a sidekick, or I'm missing that mentor character. So this is where you get to make those big, big changes. And from my experience, this is the toughest time. These are the toughest revisions, I think, because they're so big, You're rejigging the whole jigsaw puzzle. You've put all the pieces together, but they're just in slightly the wrong way. And now you're trying to figure out, okay, which pieces do I change and how do I figure them out to make them slot in, to make that picture beautifully smooth and you can see what the picture is. So there's no rushing that. There's no rushing that, because it takes as long as it takes, and it takes as long as you have the time to do it. There will be some of you out there who are in that lovely position where you can give a lot of time and energy to your fiction and to your writing, and so maybe you can make those big structural changes within a shorter period of time. It could just be a couple of weeks. But realistically, for most people who are writing in amongst doing everything else, in amongst the day job, the family, the having a social life, it's going to take a lot longer, and it could take months. I've been working on one of mine now for, it feels like, nearly 3 years, and that's been on and off, and that's because there was a phase where I was writing full time, but now I'm so busy with coaching and things that I'm back to being a part-time writer. And so I've had to kind of manage that adjustment. And it was only recently I realized that that was quite a mindset shift for me to go, oh yeah, I'm no longer a full-time writer. Actually, I'm back to writing part-time when I make that space for it. So I'm fairly diligent in making sure that I make that time in my diary each week. But it's not full time by any means. So for those of you like me who are writing part time, it's going to take longer to make those big structural changes, because that's all you can devote to it is sort of little bits and pieces here and there. So those are the big ones. Be patient with yourself there, because once you get that structural format right, once you've got that structure in place and you know the pathway for that story and that's all working, that is the biggest bulk of it done. You know, you've got the characters you need, you've got the plot line in the right direction, you've slimmed down those subplots, or could be the other way around. You realise that in fact you need to add a subplot to make the story just that little bit more interesting. Either way, you've done that big job, and that is well done you, because that takes time. Absolutely. So then the next one that you want to, I would, for my money anyway, the next round of revisions that you want to do, or the next focus for your revisions, this is where you get to add in the detail and the texture, and you start layering in the lovely details that make your story so unique, the little details that make a scene pop or a conversation sparkle. And that will come in the form of looking at, you know, the description of where the scene is taking place. So what is the room like, or what is the park like that the scene takes place in? If it's in a cafe, you know, you can just bring in those sensory details. Thinking of all 5 senses, what can you bring in? So coffee shop, absolutely. There's going to be that the smell of the coffee roasting. We'll maybe hear the clink of the teaspoons on the teacups, things like that. If it's taking place in a park, is it a children's park where there's lots of children's voices around, and there's lots of buggies about, or I'm trying to remember what you call them in the States, buggies and pushchairs. I think you call them pushchairs. So there'll be that, but maybe it's a big kind of green open space like Hyde Park here in the UK, or Central Park in New York. So there's a whole mix of people playing sports. So perhaps there's people passing on bicycles or on rollerblades. What are the noises there? We're allowed to have barbecues in the parks here, so just small ones. So maybe there's the smell of that going on in the air. There's the sound of people playing sport, and maybe there's the smell of cut grass as well. And what trees are there? What flowers are there? You know, bring in those sensory details that really bring the scene to life and really kind of make it clear in the reader's head where this scene is taking place and the atmosphere within that setting. Then I think for me, the next round then is just to make sure the dialogue is going well. I want to just make sure that everything that needs to be said in a conversation is said, that I'm not saying too much. Are my characters saying things that my reader doesn't need to hear? So can I take those out? Are there bits of information now that I know actually can be added in and would be pertinent at any one given scene? So all of these things can be added in on that third round of revisions. And then on the fourth round of revisions, or the fourth area of area of revision would then be like the small things. So then we're looking at very specific word choice, we're looking at grammar, and we're looking at punctuation. So as you read through your book again, and by the way, I really recommend that you upload your book to your Kindle. It's such a great way to read your manuscript as a reader rather than as a writer. And also by reading it in a format you cannot edit, then you cannot edit it. So you're less tempted. You're taking away that too easy temptation to just get editing straight away. You want to stay in your reader head so you can feel the flow of it and how it's going. So really good tip there is to upload that to your Kindle. If you don't have one, I really encourage you to get one, even if it's just to read your own manuscripts. And I'm sure you can get them at reasonable prices secondhand, and refurbished and so on. So I do urge you to do that if that's within your budget. So that last round of revisions, then we're really looking at, okay, what are the typos, the grammar changes that need to be made, and just particular word choices, if you changed up a word choice here and there, would that just add a little bit of extra ambience to the story you're telling, or not? Okay, so there we have the main levels of revision and editing that you'll need to go through. And I just want to reiterate that depending on your level of expertise, or should I say your level of practice at novel writing, this will get slowly but surely a more simple process, because again, not only will you have had more practice at writing, so you'll intuitively know what needs to go where, you will intuitively have a better sense of the pace of a novel and what plot points need to go where within the novel and how you build up that tension towards the end. So that will already be cleaner by the time you're several novels in. But so then that you'll have less of those big structural changes to do, which for my money really are the big time sucks. So the fewer of those that you get to do, then of course the quicker you'll speed it up. But I don't want you to see this as a race, make sure that you're giving your best to your story, because really the level of revision and editing you put in will determine the quality of the story that you're putting out into the world, or the finesse of the story that you are looking to query. And for those of you who are querying, I really want to impress upon you that you definitely want this to be the best product that you can put out there. You do not want to rush it, and then you don't want to rush it so that you lower the quality of the book, because for each agent, each book only gets one shot with each agent. So you've really got to make it count. So don't rush this, take your time with it, make sure it's as good as it can be. And I'm going to add in that if this is within your budget, because I know it's not for everybody, but if it is within your budget, I really recommend that you get an editor to look at it, and particularly for the developmental edit, I think that is the most important one. So if you can do that, I absolutely recommend it. I do also recommend getting you can either hire a proofreader, and there'll be a charge for that, obviously, but you can also go to some author websites such as Critique Circle, I beg your pardon, and Story Origin, and you can find not proofreaders, but you can find ARC readers, so advanced reader copies. So you're what's also known as your street team, so people who will read the book for you and they will feed back on it. And that's a really great way to get feedback on whether the story is working or not, because they are somebody who really loves reading in your genre. You want to make sure of that. You will give them some questions for the beta reader. So you want them to answer certain questions, such as at which point in the story did you get bored? When did you switch off? Was it believable? Maybe some pertinent questions about your protagonist as well. You'll be asking those specific questions from your beta reader to know that the book is on track. So they're going to come to it with fresh eyes. They'll have nothing more than the blurb or the kind of marketing that the sort of the back of the book jacket cover that you've written for it to entice them in to come and read it. So they're going to be your best bet to pick up any kind of story gaps, plug any holes, but they'll also pick up on any glaring typos and errors. So it's really worthwhile taking the extra, perhaps month or two, to get people to do that for you before you query and before you publish. So I hope that's given you a rundown of editing. I hope I've sort of encouraged you not to race through this process, that this is a really important process. It's what turns your book from being good to being great. You know, you'll hear a lot of people say that the magic is in the revision. The magic definitely is not in the first draft. The magic is in the revision. So make sure that you give it that time that it needs and it deserves to turn your book from good to great, and thus giving it the best chance it has to either get picked up by an agent, or if you're self-publishing, to get those big, all-important 5-star reviews. All right, take care, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye.